Great. As we're arriving, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you're joining from, what brings you here today. Give it just a couple minutes for folks to come in. We're excited to hear from you. Hi, Bill and Alexandria. You know you. We're going to be hearing from Bill a little later in the series. Same from Dr. Andrea in San Diego. Hi, Joanne in Rochester. Where else are folks coming from today? Nancy in Davenport.
Julie in DC. We have Austin, Texas in the house. This is beautiful. Anna from Santa Clara.
Hi, Maeve, our DC neighbor. Rose in San Antonio. Awesome. We're right at the hour, so I know we're going to have folks coming in for just a minute. And then we're going to get rolling. We have lots to cover. Hey, Mary Pat in Charleston, Mike in Fort Worth, welcome.
Welcome.
Okay. I know we're going to have folks continue to join us probably throughout the next few minutes, but we want to go ahead and get rolling, kick things off here. So if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, take a moment to look around the room and see who's here and joining us. As for me, I am Caitlin Morneau, and I serve as Director of Restorative Justice at Catholic Mobilizing Network. First, want to say happy Restorative Justice Week, International Restorative Justice Week. We are part of a global community celebrating this movement this week. And thank you all for joining us today. This is our first session of how to bring restorative justice to your parish and ministry. So if you're not familiar with Catholic Mobilizing Network, which I imagine many of you are, but just in case, we are the national Catholic organization working to end the death penalty and promote restorative justice. So before we dive into some of the amazing content of this guide and in dialogue with one another, we wanted to offer just a little introduction about ourselves as your co-facilitators. I feel so honored and blessed to be joined by Tomei and just the opportunity to collaborate on this offering with you all. So just briefly, I'm here because perhaps like you, when I first learned about restorative justice, it seemed so beautifully in line with my Catholic values. And then as I reflected on harms and traumas in the lives of families that I ministered with, that was even more so true. So then I began discerning my own privileges and responsibilities in ending racism. And as I did so, restorative justice approaches offered a way forward that was inviting and hope-filled. So now the more I understand about this growing restorative justice movement, the more I see faith communities as critical to the work of upholding dignity and healing relationships and transforming systems. So, and that's really the work that we're about here at Catholic Mobilizing Network. So creating this guide was truly a labor of love, and we are excited to give it life and breath in this way with all of you. So again, huge thanks to May for co-facilitating with me, for Desiree, who will be in conversation with us later, and to Maura, who our program associate and tech guru, who is making so much happen behind the scenes today. Thanks also to Caitlin Tully for being like tech and chat support. So if you're having any tech issues, feel free to send her a message. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tomei.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Hello, hello. I am so excited, honored, and blessed to be here in this space because, well, I normally don't like to lead with any credentials because for me, it's really about connecting to your humanity. However, I will share that I am a social worker and I'm currently a PhD student in the Education for Social Justice program at the University of San Diego. I am also a co-founder of Worksheet Inc., a nonprofit. But I really just want to say that this whole event today is me coming full circle with who I am as a child that was raised Catholic by my dad and by my mom in the Pentecostal church. So for me, this is just such a beautiful coming home because restorative justice is what happens in spirituality. So I'm just excited to be here with you today. And I look forward to the dialogue with Dr. Anderson and just connecting as much as possible with you all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you and maybe some folks who are continuing to trickle in. Of course, in the spirit of this work, we wanted to open in prayer, and we are so grateful to Deacon Tim Hayden, who is the Associate Director for Restorative Justice Ministry in the Diocese of Austin, for leading us in prayer. This is one of the grounding prayers in the beginning of the guide, given to us by our Episcopal advisor, Bishop Daniel Flores. So thank you, Deacon Tim, for leading us in prayer.
Very good, thank you. Glad to be here with you all. Excuse me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. God, eternal Father, you are the living God. Life is who you are. Life is what you love. Life is what you breathe. Creation was made to house life. Life is what you give. Human life is your most beloved and what you most affirm when you sent your eternal Son to take flesh, to die our death, and to rise again glorious. Help us to be people of life, a church that can do no other than love what you so mighty love and defend what your Son so willingly died and rose to defend. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you so much, Deacon Tim. I'll turn it over to Maura to lead us through some housekeeping. Thanks, Maura.
Thank you for that lovely prayer, Deacon Tim. Welcome, everyone. As Caitlin and Tomei have echoed, we are so glad to have you here together in community today. We all hope this can be a productive space for us to learn and grow together, and I just have a few notes to help it maintain that productive atmosphere. So the first thing I'm going to ask is I'm going to invite you to keep your video on. We are so glad to have you here and to see your lovely faces, and we would love to see them throughout the duration of the webinar if you feel so comfortable. The one thing we would not ask you to have on throughout the webinar, though, is your microphone. As I'm sure many of you know, it can get crazy when multiple microphones are on Zoom. So unless you're being invited to share, whether in a breakout room or later on in large group, please do keep that microphone off. Thirdly, I ask that you chat with intention. At certain moments today, we will invite you to use the chat, but if it's not one of those moments, please use your best judgment. Does what I'm thinking need to go in chat right now? The way I like to think about it is, if I were sitting in an auditorium of a presentation in person, would I need to shout this out in front of the whole group? If it's not something like that, I recommend don't put it in the large chat. If you haven't done so already, update your Zoom name with who you are, where you're coming from if you're interested. This will just help us get to know each other. If you have any issues with technology, please send a message to Caitlin Tully, who has tech in front of her name, and hopefully she can help you out. And a reminder that this session is being recorded. We will be sending this to you and all other people who have registered so that you can use it for posterity. I will make a note, though, when you go into your breakout sessions, that will not be recorded. So have no fear, what you say in breakout sessions will not be disseminated largely. And one final note, I know I said to be hesitant about using chat, but if you don't know already, Zoom has a great feature called reactions. On that bottom bar of your Zoom screen, you'll see reactions, and that will pop up with several different emoji options. So if you're listening to someone share and it really resonates with you or speaks to your heart, feel free to click that heart button. It'll pop up right next to your face and then go away after about 30 seconds. Thank you, Caitlin and Tomei, for demonstrating. Similarly, if someone says something really funny, if there's a laughing face, this is just a great way for us to connect to one another, share how we're responding to what's being shared without maybe going into that chat feature. With that being said, welcome to this space, and I'll turn it back to Tomei for our first activity.
Thank you, Maura. That was beautiful. I love the way you just laid that out for us so we can continue to be in community together. So we will be doing something similar to speed dating. We're going to go into randomized rooms and get to know each other. And because we want to just really be mindful of the time and getting to the meat and the substance of why we are here today, I just want you to bear with us because we will have more opportunities to make connections and be in community with one another. So when you go into this, your room, there are 3 questions that we ask you to ask those in the room, and you'll have it broadcast to you. So one is share who you are without using your title. And the second is, what is your personal weather forecast today? And the third, what is one reason you registered for this series? So again, share who you are without using your title. I am Tomei, a repairer of the breach. That's me sharing myself without using a title. My personal weather forecast for today, it is extremely sunny. There's a beautiful forecast reminding me of the promises of God. There's a beautiful rainbow in my forecast that's reminding me of the promises of God. So that is how I share my weather forecast. And the last one, what is one reason you registered for this series? You are one reason that I registered for this series, and in my personal faith and spiritual growth and making connections with you all. So I'm going to check in and see, are we ready to go into our randomized breakout rooms?
1 more minute. Thanks, Tomei.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So again, we're just going to have a short amount of time when we go into our breakout rooms because we want to make sure that we get to the meat of things. And again, we are creating more opportunities for us to be together in community, right? Because as I remember growing up and going to church, and even my faith, community is everything. We see Jesus speaking to crowds and multitudes of people, whether it's the Beatitudes that he was sharing, but we always see him speaking to a multitude and not even forsaking them when they were hungry. Right? And even the disciples were like, they're hungry. We should send them away. But instead, no, that's where we have the story of the miracles. So I'm just excited that we are here today so we can join with our faith. We can be strengthened in our ministries and our parishes and incorporating restorative justice. Thank you. Back to you, Maura.
All right, and it looks like our rooms are ready. So if you see that screen popping up to join your breakout room, go ahead and join. Wonderful. Hopefully that was a nice connective time. Maybe you saw familiar faces in your breakout room. Hopefully you saw some new and unfamiliar faces to make some good connections as well. Very good. All right. Well, we're going to keep on rolling and just review a little bit about kind of how we're coming together today. First, I really want to give deep thanks for all of the people and perspectives who informed the creation of the Paths of Renewed Encounter guide, some of whom I know are on the line with us or will be in future sessions as well. And so we acknowledge these people, we acknowledge the many leaders and people directly impacted by crime and incarceration and marginalization, on whose shoulders we lean on this work, and most especially Indigenous and our Native brothers and sisters whose ancestral ways of being in community and peacemaking really shape contemporary restorative practices. And we hold this deeply as we engage in the work. So we have four main goals throughout these sessions, which are to practice ways of interacting with the guide and its material in prayer and in discernment with our own experiences and in dialogue with one another. And then to understand core concepts of restorative justice, especially as they relate to Catholic social teaching and scripture, and engaging lenses, particularly of racial justice and trauma healing. And then to locate ourselves, yourself, your group within particular opportunities in ministry. And finally, to identify some next steps for charting your roadmap on this path toward renewed encounter. So we know we can't cover everything in the guide in this time together, but hopefully it kind of breaks open and breaks down some of the pieces to make it accessible and maybe ignite some new ideas along the way in the journey. And again, just want to highlight that we will be, okay, sorry, got ahead of myself. So particularly today, we're going to practice connecting and reflecting. We just did a little bit of that connecting already, and there will be times for both group and individual reflection throughout. And then really just looking at this main question of what is restorative justice when we use these terms. And today we're specifically going to focus and spotlight on the opportunity for building community resilience and public awareness and how important that is in the scope of this work of restorative justice. And then identifying key values, goals, and looking at the context that we are in, locally or ministerially, and how the actions and steps that we take relate to what all may be happening around us in our communities and our global community as well. And so I won't read through this in general. This is a box that you'll see throughout the guide, but really aims to identify those four key areas of opportunity within ministry. And just wanted to reiterate how, while we will focus on and spotlight particular ones in each session, that there will be tools and learnings that are applicable to all settings throughout. So regardless of where you find yourself most drawn, we hope that you'll join us for the entirety of the series. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Tomei for a poll.
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so now we want to acknowledge that you are all coming from different places and have different experiences. So we are going to ask you to respond to this poll. And the poll is asking, how would you describe your primary role? That connects you to RJ, right? To restorative justice. So for an example, I'm a family member of a victim survivor or a person who is justice involved, formerly incarcerated or justice involved, working within the criminal legal system, involved in prison or reentry ministry, ministry leader in my parish community. I see we have a lot of, yes, priest, minister, or religious person, educator, administrator, or student, K through 12, staff at a Catholic diocese or nonprofit organization, restorative justice facilitator or practitioner. This is so beautiful. We have a myriad of people in the room. Okay, we have a lot of ministry leaders. That is so important, right? To carry the message of hope, the message of restoration. Wow, a message where we can just honor one another's humanity and give glory to God in the process. This is beautiful. We have educators in the room, we have staff members, we have some people who are family members of a victim or survivor. You know, I always say that the minute you survive something, your overcomers gene has been activated. So sometimes people are walking around as overcomers and they don't even realize it. So I'm so glad you're here today in this space. We have people who are priests, ministers, or religious person. Thank you so much. or those who are involved in reentry ministry. I think we captured it all, right? Almost. We have
Awesome.
about 84%, yes.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we're always curious to see, yeah, who's in the room with us, and that some of us carry multiple of these identities and identities that aren't listed here, right? That we are all just such multifaceted people who have many kinds of affiliations that may motivate us in this pursuit. So thanks for sharing with us. All right, so next we wanted to delve into some of these questions of what is restorative justice. And we know and acknowledge here at CMN and elsewhere that there isn't one single definition of restorative justice, but there are definitely common themes and concepts. And so this is a video compilation of speakers from Catholic Mobilizing Network's 2020 virtual conference, Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity, that brings some of these voices and core principles together. So thanks for joining us and watching this brief video.
Restorative justice calls for the healing of all people, those who were the perpetrators, those who were the victims, including all who were affected, the families on both sides, the community, and those who serve the community.
It's a relational approach to not only justice, but to life. It's also a framework, a conceptual framework, a set of principles and practices that provides a kind of vision of how we want to live together.
Victims can move from feelings of fear, anger, retribution to understanding. People who have committed crimes can accept responsibility, be accountable for their action, and take tangible steps to repair the harm that they have done to the victim and community.
Accountability requires that I acknowledge what I've done, that I acknowledge its impact, that I make things as right as possible, ideally in a way defined by those I have hurt, and that I engage in the extraordinary labor of becoming somebody who will not cause that harm ever again.
It can be big things, but it can also be the smallest thing in just listening and holding space and not asking any questions and just letting someone weep.
It is far more expansive and demanding a notion of justice than procedural justice can ever hope to be.
I myself am a survivor, and I wish that restorative justice had been available to my family.
The community of restorative justice is something that helps us as the offender, because this community is one that believes that people can change their life. And I'm grateful for that, because I know in my heart and in everything that I do that I'm not the person I was.
This is a Mayan saying, en la que tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. When you learn, we all learn. When you struggle, we all struggle. When you heal, we all heal. When you grow, we all grow. When you transform, we all transform. You are me, I am you. We are one.
Beautiful. Right, so now we're going to have a brief opportunity to share kind of what stood out to us. So we're going to use a little tool called Jamboard. Maybe you've used it before, but I'm putting a link in the chat. You can click that link and it's going to open up a screen. And so, Tomei, would you introduce our Jamboard?
Sure. So when you go to the Jamboard, of course, we want to hear your voice, because you matter, your voice matters, and we believe in honoring the power of your voice. So when you go to the Jamboard and open it up, on the left side, you'll see on the lower part a box with the T in it. So you can click on that T and then just start typing in it, right? Some people, if you're familiar with the sticky note, then you can use that. So there are just different variations that you can use it, so we can capture. One What really stood out to you from the video, watching the video? What stood out to you? That's the question we're asking you and asking for feedback in the Jamboard. Thank you. So I see them coming in. Everyone is included in the process. You are my other me in Lakesh. I love that. I love that one as well. So we have in the chat, Nick said the variety of people stood out most. And we form and love in a community starts with self. Yes. Yes, this is amazing. This is beautiful. How I'm already contributing to this cause and healing, not punishment. Accountability. Yes, listening deeply, just simply being there. That's powerful. Sometimes we don't like silence, but silence is a powerful tool. Yes. This is amazing. And we have other pages, so you can click the arrow on the top. So you can go to the next page and add more in if it's starting to get a little bit crowded. And this is beautiful because it represents all of our voices just being captured, right? So you can always go up to the top and click on the arrow and go to the next page if that first page is too crowded. Thank you. What stood out to you? Yes, that was powerful. Let someone weep. Right? That was social work 101 in grad school. If one of your clients start crying, don't run and try to stop them or give them tissue. Just let them weep, right? Just let them weep. Thank you for sharing that. I am not who I was. And I can say that daily, right? Each day it's trying to be better than the day before. That's how I try to live my life. More expansive than procedural justice can ever be. I love it. Relational, yes. Acknowledgement, right? Just affirming that you hear someone. Just to be heard is powerful in itself. Thank you.
Beautiful. I know each time I watch that video, something new stands out to me. So, and I love hearing how it resonates with others as well. Well, from here, we wanted to delve into how do some of these themes that, we've maybe heard restorative justice, maybe referenced in the context of our faith, but maybe outside of it as well. And some of these core principles maybe, resonate with us because of how they align with the values of our faith. And so for this next session, I just wanted to open us with this incredible, beautiful quote from Pope Francis in his most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, where he articulates these principles of restorative justice time and time again. And he says, justice is properly sought solely out of love of justice itself, out of respect for the victims as a means of preventing new crimes and protecting the common good, not as an alleged outlet for personal anger. Forgiveness is precisely what enables us to pursue justice without falling into a spiral of revenge or the injustice of forgetting. And so I think it's helpful how he contrasts an angry justice that's shaped by revenge or neglect with a forgiving justice that's focused on the needs of victims and the common good. And so another way that I have found and others have found helpful to think about restorative justice is in the questions that it asks. And thank you, Howard Zare, for the way he lays this out in his book, Changing Lenses, that our traditional justice system tends to ask three main questions, which are what law was broken, who is guilty, and what should their punishment be? Whereas restorative justice asks a different set of questions, primarily who was harmed, who was impacted and how, and what needs to be done to make it right. So these questions feel quite different from one another. And we acknowledge that they exist on a spectrum, right? I think throughout the guide, you'll see spectrums that it's not necessarily one or the other. Sometimes there are elements of both taking place in a particular process or way forward. But that the more we can lean into a restorative way of being, the more that we can lean into God's justice. And so in the guide, you'll also see these questions kind of expanded into a set of 5. And here I want to acknowledge and thank Susan Sharp, University of Notre Dame, who took these 5 expanded questions and really examined how they related to core themes and principles of Catholic social teaching. And so in different sections of the guide, you'll see these referenced, but just want to break them open a little bit. So these first 2 questions in particular, what is the harm, who is impacted, and how? We can really see how this reflects the life and dignity of the human person, and particularly centering the option for the poor and vulnerable in prioritizing those who have been victimized, those who have been harmed, and remembering that so many times, if not every time, those who cause harm were first harmed or victimized themselves. That hurt people, but that transformed people and healed people can heal people as well. So then when we ask what are the needs, we remember that human dignity is both individual and relational, and that we have material needs, but also physical, spiritual, and emotional needs for human flourishing that really connect with the call to solidarity with one another. And whose obligations are these? We think about rights and responsibilities and how those are interwoven with one another, that we are responsible for and accountable to one another in everything that we do. And finally, what's the appropriate process to repair the harm? And this makes us think of the call to family and community and participation, that we all have a role to play, not only those who were directly involved, but including families and communities as well. And here too, I'll just name 2 that aren't specifically identified, but I think of is the call to the common good, and how in this work and pursuit, we have to consider the structures and systems as well as the issue or conflict at hand. And as well as the theme of subsidiarity, that those who are closest to the problem ought to be closest to the solution, and really have a say, not only have a say over, but be centered in the process that concerns them. So those are all really core principles in restorative justice. And I'll turn it over to May to lead us through thinking about values and restorative justice. Oh, wait. No, I got ahead of myself. We were going to go into small groups again. Thank you. Beauty of co-facilitation. So now we wanted to send you into small groups briefly and have you just reflect on the question of which of these core questions or values of Catholic social teaching speaks to you most deeply and why. And so we'll have just about how many minutes do we have on our breakout room, Laura? 5 minutes. 5 minutes to reflect on which of these core values speaks to you. And I'll drop in the chat where you can find these in the guide if you'd like to reference them there. Thanks.
Okay. Welcome back. So we are going to move into our value exercise where we're going to co-create a word cloud together. And you already went in and started thinking about values around Catholic social principles, teaching principles, and what stood out for you. So here's the link. Let me drop that in before I start talking and totally forget. There's the link for you to open up our word cloud. And we're asking you just to place some values, right? Your own set of values. So reflect upon like what you just shared in your room, and then write down the value that you need to show up as your best self, right? So for me, love is the value that I lean into to show up as my best self. Thank you. Someone put that in right away. Love, honesty, respect for each person, authenticity, yes, empathy. And I also think about the values that I sometimes struggle with, right? And courage. Sometimes I struggle with the courage to speak up, or to intervene if I see something, or just to go to someone who's hurting and even ask them would they like to pray together, or just to share so I can be an ear for them. So think about that as well. Like, how can you show up in a value that you might seemingly struggle with, right? Because it's all about having grace and compassion for ourselves as well as each other. So I thank you. Authenticity, compassion, yes, dignity, hope, understanding. I love how we're coming together with this. These are the things that are so important that we can lean on. Yes, and openness in the chat. We have accountability. Thank you so much. Empathy, love, respect. Thank you for those who are placing it in the chat if you didn't have access to the word cloud. But this is our co-creation that everyone will receive. Yes, yes. Thank you. Willingness, tolerance, listening, hope. Yes. This is beautiful. Thank you so much for this. And just remember to have compassion for yourself, vulnerability, solidarity, show yourself grace, right? Because there were moments that even Jesus, he said, because of their unbelief, he had to move away from certain situations. So you have to make sure you take care of yourself, right? As you show up as your best self, just lean into that. Dignity, transparency. I love it. I love it. Yes, empathy. Thank you so much for this.
Awesome. And so in the guide, you'll see there's a whole section dedicated to values, core values of restorative justice. And there's an invitation there too, to you and your group, that as you go forth in charting these paths of renewed encounter, what values do you name as a group and as a ministry as being really core to how you go about that work? The folks who have been in circle process know that when we come together, we name shared values first and build consensus around those, so that we can, in that process, we can be in relationship in a good way with one another. So we'll come back to these themes, but that's how it's connected to some of these conversations and where you'll find more in the guide. All right, so next, I'm very excited to transition into our conversation with Dr. Desiree Anderson. And so we hope to have this, to learn from her and have this conversation and model this way of learning from others who are embedded in this work in ways that might shape and inform how we engage within our ministries. So Dr. Desiree Anderson is presently serving as Associate Dean of Diversity and Student Affairs at the University of New Orleans, where when we met, she was director of the Intercultural Center at St. Mary's College in California. She's a national trainer with the Restorative Justice Network of Catholic Campuses at University of San Diego, and author in Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voicing Our Realities. Her PhD study and practice centered on addressing issues of bias and hate on college and university campuses. And she is also leading processes with Crescent City Corps on public safety, community policing, and building relationship and shared responsibility to impact change. Desiree contributed to the guide's section on public awareness and community resilience. So she was a natural to have a conversation with today. And welcome, Desiree. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Good.
Well, I guess to kick things off, would you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your restorative justice practice?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I really got into this work sort of by accident. It started when I was in my doctoral program, and I went to an educational conference, and in the process learned a little bit more about what restorative justice was. And in that moment of thinking like, wow, why is this not something that we're using more in basically all spaces, right? Like, this to me is this principle about, as we saw in the video earlier, about like being in relationships and the power that relationships have to transform community and spaces, right? The person saying, I'm not who I was, right? So how do we move to getting people to be not who they were, anymore? And how do we allow people to move on from the things that they've done and that caused harm, so that they won't do it in the future? And as I really got deeper and deeper into this type of work, I started thinking about, well, where else can this be put into place? And that's what led me to do my dissertation work, really thinking about what are the better ways that we can be addressing harm, especially structural, and inflamed harm, historical harm that's happening in a space that's dedicated to educating people, right? Like what a better space to really be doing this type of work. And in that process, though, I really realized that there were some things that were kind of missing when we were talking about restorative justice. It was kind of often being talked about in this very reactionary type of way, as opposed to being a thing that you live, right? Restorative justice is not something that you do, it is something that is. And in that process, you know, I really kept thinking about, well, why is that? Why is it kind of being framed in this way of something that you do as opposed to something that you is? And I realized that the community aspect was often being left out of the work, that people were not really thinking about the role that community plays and the success, right? And the ability for restorative justice to really be transformational. How can we really commit to change if we can't commit to community? And I'm realizing that the sun is like, let me do back up this way so now I don't have a shadow on my face there. And so that was really where the work kind of brought me, and how I've transitioned into doing this work for the past 7 years. Yes, 7 years. So yeah.
Wow, thank you for that response, Desiree. I really appreciated it. And you already sort of like went into the next question, like answering it, but it's so important. Can you really just speak to the relationship between community building and restorative justice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important part of restorative justice is the community building aspect. If you think about the roots, right, the indigeneity of what restorative justice is built upon, it was about how do we restore relationships? Well, you can't really restore a relationship if you don't have one, right? And so when we think about community, right, with that community building is about developing relationships with one another. Because if we're in relationship with one another, one, I'm going to be more inclined to want to repair the relationship that we have, because I don't want to ruin that, right? We have some type of connection, we have some type of community. So I'm going to be more invested on my part, regardless if I'm the person who's been harmed or if I was the person who caused harm, to want to repair it. And the other aspect of that is also, if we're really thinking about the community aspect of thing and we're really building relationships, I'm also less likely to want to cause you harm. I'm going to be more mindful, right? So we're thinking about it from that proactive space, right? It's no longer just about thinking about restorative justice as this reactionary tool, but it's also a proactive tool. If I'm able to really build relationships and be in community with a person, then I'm going to be less inclined to want to do things that hurt them. And then if I do things that hurt them, intentional or not, I'm going to then be more inclined to want to make repair, right? To make amends, right? To change how that relationship is formed. And I'm also going to be more inclined to forgive that person. It's a lot easier, right? We think about jokingly, people used to say, I can call my brother's name, but you can't. And that's exactly what it is, right? Like, you're going to be more inclined to want to be able to communicate to somebody a harm that they have done to you when you have a relationship with them, right? Because it's a lot easier to tell somebody when you've been in a relationship with them how they've impacted you than someone that you don't really have a relationship with, because it's just, I'm going to just ignore that person, or I'm just going to stop talking to that person altogether. But now they've not learned how they've impacted another person, and they're going to walk through life continuing to impact other people in the exact same way, because we just didn't feel the need to communicate with them because we didn't have relationships with them. So for me, the community building aspect is the most essential part. It should be the biggest chunk of our restorative work. The majority, like 80% of the work we should really be doing is about the community building piece, right? And as you do that, everything else falls in line really easy, right? People get in the habit of being in circle, they get in the habit of being able to communicate. They learned how to use the restorative language, right? So Caitlin showed the slide talking about the way that, criminal history often asks questions versus the way that restorative, questions are asked. Well, if you're using that type of language of like, how have you been impacted? Who's been impacted? What harm has happened? What happened, as opposed to what did you do? And you're making that a part of your everyday life, that's going to be transformative with the people in your inner circle. And that's going to then translate to their ability to do that with people in their inner circle. And so for me, that community piece is the most essential part of this work.
Thank you so much, Desiree. I love how you frame this as being not just reactionary, but also preventative. And I think one of the questions I really appreciate when I hear it sometimes is, how do you restore relationships when the trauma is ongoing, when the pain is ongoing, the oppression is ongoing, and especially in your work around racial bias? Can you talk about how this also builds resiliency when there is ongoing trauma and oppression?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, as painful as it can be, is that we have to be willing to give grace to people in their learning. Because if we're not, they're not going to want to be in the learning process, right? To be able to understand how they've impacted other people, and they're not going to stop the behavior. And so part of thinking about this work, one is that you can do restorative practices within yourself, right? For yourself, with people who you are in community with, to be able to process the things that are happening with and around you. So you're able to really think about using restorative practices for your own healing, to be able to continue to do the work of addressing trauma, right? Of addressing historical harm. And then on the other side of that is, as you really start to continue, again, thinking about this idea of living restoratively, is that you recognize that I can't be a person who's not willing to forgive. I cannot be a person who's not willing to offer grace to someone else. I cannot be a person who is not willing to engage with a person, even when they have caused me harm, if I want there to be change, and if I want there to be transformation, if I want them to stop this behavior, right? And so being able to think, especially think again from this idea of like the dignity of who they are, right? As we've talked about already earlier, hurt people. So being able to understand the root cause of why, right, this ongoing trauma is happening, and recognizing that just like everything, we don't learn things at one time, right? It takes multiple times for things to become a habit. It takes multiple times for us to unlearn things. Unlearning is so difficult. It is such a difficult process, right? We talk, it's like the same type of thing, like, right? It's really easy to gain weight, but it's really hard to lose weight, right? And it's the same way, right? It's really easy to learn bad behaviors, right? Or things, because we don't realize that we were learning them. We were just conditioned in them. We were socialized in ways of being in practice that we don't even know that they are hurtful to other people. And when we start to realize that, oh, that thing that I've been doing is hurtful, that unlearning process is like the losing weight. You have to really practice at it. You have to be much more conscious of it. And in doing that, it's going to take time. So for me, thinking about this resilience piece is that I have to be willing to put in that effort to be open to kind of working with people through their unlearning, through their unpacking of trauma that they've experienced that led them to cause harm, through their unlearning of like, wow, I didn't even realize I was causing harm. I didn't understand that the thing that I was doing is a result of white supremacy, of racism, of oppression, of, the criminal justice system was designed in this particular way. I didn't realize that I was participate in those things. And so now I'm trying to unlearn that, right? And so through that process is how you really build, one, the resilience for yourself, but also for the other people, so that they stick with it. So they stick with engaging in this work, because it's hard. It's not easy. And I know for some people, they think that, oh, if you're just sitting in a circle and it's kumbaya and it feels good. And to a degree, there are parts of it that does feel good, but apologizing is hard. Like, it's really hard if you're going to do it well, right? Holding yourself accountable for the harm that you have done is incredibly difficult. And so the resilience process and the way that we often kind of scaffold or structure these processes is allowing people to build up to that place where they can finally hold themselves accountable, where they can finally make those amends in a way where they're both supported and understood as a whole being. And so that's really where that community building piece is also really important, because I get to see you as a whole person and not the person who did this thing, who caused this harm, or who was impacted by this thing. I want to see you as a full, whole human being worthy of dignity and respect. And that's through these processes, that's really how you're building that resilience for both yourself as the practitioner, but also for the as a participant.
Thank you for that. And I really what it resonated with me, just going back to listening to you explain this, is the fact that restorative practices, it becomes a way of life, a way of being when you practice it and when you do it. And I love the framing around it, and also the reality that, we give ourselves grace and then extend that same grace to other people. As you said, we're learning and learning, and then have to unlearn a few things. And unlearning is quite difficult. So sometimes it's like, well, let me just relearn this thing, right? Because I got it wrong, so let me relearn it. So it brings me to my next question, like, how can we use this approach to really bring more public awareness around this? And have people really understand what RJ is? Because to your point, people often think sometimes, oh, it's just this feel good kumbaya, and it's not. It's really hard to be able to sit with yourself. Sometimes it's hard for people to just sit in silence and meditate, right? So how can we use this approach to build more of a public awareness and an understanding of RJ?
Yeah, I think often when I'm starting with stuff, and I can use the example one thing that I did fairly recently, and so I actually was working, so Caitlin mentioned it, with Crescent City Core, and it's a group, it's a nonprofit that's doing work around policing, right? And thinking about how do we go back to community policing. And so during the first week that they were together, right, they've got to build relationships in order to think about, how they're going to hold each other accountable as police officers, to then think about how they can then hold the community accountable. And so really we're thinking about values, we're talking about how do we build relationships, we're finding ways to get to know each other, we're doing a talking peace circle. And I'm not necessarily calling those things restorative justice when we're engaging in it in the beginning. We're just doing these practices, we're just engaging in these things that feel kind of good, right? And so after people, kind of go through these process, at the end, I'm like, oh, how did you feel about that? Like, oh yeah, that was great. Great. You like that? Wonderful. That was restorative justice. That was a restorative practice. That was right. And so sometimes, because I think people, when you start off sometimes with just, oh, we're going to do some restorative justice. And you're like, people kind of are closed off because they're not sure what it is. And so they're not necessarily opening themselves up to the experience. So sometimes just letting people experience parts of the thing without kind of telling them what it is. And then, hello, that was a restorative practice, right? That was a restorative element. And that's really what I like to do, in part because what I often say is that we're often really not doing restorative justice, right? Because there's all of these different elements that need to intersect for the justice part to be happening. We're mostly doing restorative practices that then can lead to restorative justice. And so I'm always really mindful about how we talk about what restorative justice is and is not. But I think as you do things like that, that's how you really build that public awareness and start inputting little pieces here and there. So again, reframing the way that you're asking questions or that you're communicating with people. So using that restorative language, it's a small thing that you could start doing immediately in your current practices and in your everyday life. Doing community building circles, right, is another way of quickly introducing these practices. I do it with every single meeting that I have that I'm a host for. I use check-in questions. I talk about values. I do, every time, right? So again, it's just thinking about building relationships, community building, right? So it's a way of introducing people into the practices of restorative justice, this idea of community and relationship, without having to, really name it as restorative justice and then coming back to that later. But when it is time, I think, to just really name it, is to just do that, to say, this is something that I value, and here's why. Here's how it's been beneficial in being able to talk about the experiences that you've had or that you've used as a tool. And I could talk forever examples of moments that were like, this is the moment that I knew that restorative justice was going to be a fantastic tool. And I can, if we have time at the end, bring up some of those examples, but I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree. I already see that we're getting some questions in the chat. So I encourage folks at this point to add your questions in the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try to pass them along to Desiree. And if we don't get to your question, we will save the chat send them to Desiree and have her send us some responses. So I want to acknowledge, thank you, Steve, for your question about talking about what the circle is. I know we're going to go into more detail about circle process as a core restorative practice in future sessions. But if Desiree, if you want to give your your brief kind of description, a little bit more about circle process and what you mean by, Anna asks us to delineate a little more and explain what we mean by community. So how would you, I guess, how would you respond to those, a couple of questions of how would you describe what we mean by community and a little bit more about circle process and its role?
Yeah. So what I mean by community, right? I mean, and community can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people. And so, I mean, right now, technically, this is a community, right? We are in community with one another, but that's generally not specifically what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is going to be in places where people are going to be consistently in relationship with one another, right? Where they're going to be around each other a lot, where you could be doing this type of work. So kind of structured spaces where interactions are going to be ongoing. So for example, I work on a college campus, right? So that is a collective community, but then there's communities within that. So in the residence halls, in student organizations, within the staff members, right? So in your parishes, right? Your ministry within your church, right? That is a community. So how can you be building relationships amongst those individuals there so that as things are happening, you can learn and grow together and address things? It might be that you create some type of like kind of a community and that they're going to be together repeatedly to build relationships. But thinking about it in the larger structure of things, so in K-12 schools, right? So there's schools that are doing that in their classrooms. They're engaging in what we would say is like circle practices. And so circles really mean is an opportunity in a space to build relationships or build community to address particular issues or concerns. And so what circle means really is literally to sit in a circle if you can. Sometimes we've been doing it on Zoom because of the pandemic, but we've made it work. But generally you're sitting in an actual circle because it's representing, right? Like there's no hierarchy in that space, but you do have a person who's facilitating the structure that is allowing each person to answer a question that you have developed and to learn about every person who's sitting in the circle, but specifically to think about how do you learn more about the people in the circle? What are the issues and concerns that are coming up or why you're gathered in that particular way? What collective way can we as a group in that circle come to a conclusion together to address that concern or issue? And then what action steps might we take as a collective and individually when we leave the circle? It's kind of hard to it's hard to talk about circle in like a 2-minute structured answer, but that's broadly what circle means there.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Sue, for dropping in a link to Living Justice Press.
Yes.
Really tremendous resource around circles. There's so much more here, right? Like this is just skimming the surface, but hopefully it's piquing your curiosity. And so I think we're gonna maybe end on this question, but would love to hear your thoughts, Desiree. How do we get people to come to introductions to restorative justice and circles? So what does that invitation look like, especially if folks might be tentative or skeptical?
Yeah, it depends. So on one aspect, it is just we're gonna come together to talk about X, and then when they get there, you're engaging them in a restorative process, and you're kind of explaining it as you get there. So one is just really thinking about what it is that you're going to talk about and inviting people into that space. But if you want to actually talk about it from the perspective of restorative justice, then I think perhaps using the clip that Caitlin shared at the beginning around what is restorative justice, sending that information out and saying, this is what restorative justice is, right? It's about bringing people together to build relationships with one another and to, address X concern, X, Y, and Z or whatever. And in that process, the goal is for us to come together and collectively, make a decision or to collectively decide how things might run. I'm like, I really can't figure out how to sit. The sun is, I don't know where to sit. Okay. right? So how do you get people, excuse me, to come into that space? So again, topic-based. So we're going to be talking about, let's say, I'm trying to think about one we did. So we had one on our campus. We had some bias-related incidents, and we invited our students by simply saying, we've had these issues come up, and we'd like to bring you all to come and sit in community with one another to talk about the ways that you have experienced this moment, what concerns you have, and what you would like for us as the administration to do to help respond to these issues, and inviting that, and then sharing with them what the process looks like, so that everybody will have an equal voice, an opportunity to share, that if you just want to sit and listen, that you're also able to do that and engage in that way. But we will offer a space for everyone to have an equal space to be able to share their concerns about X topic. And I think that sometimes it's just as simple as that, right? So again, not really emphasizing the language of, or the term restorative justice, because that doesn't mean anything to anybody. So what are you going to be doing in that space, and inviting them in that way? We were going to be coming together to talk as a collective with equal voice about this, or to be able to build relationship around this topic. And that's how you invite people into restorative justice. And then once they're done, you say, that was restorative justice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree. We know that there's so much more there. We really appreciate your wisdom. And if everyone could just share a gesture of thanks and gratitude, maybe it's an emoji, an applause. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to thank too, Christine, for naming Tree Kahimsa Foundation in San Diego. Also incredible family and foundation and group. And thank you, Katie, for naming the synodal process that our church has been invited into. We see real opportunity and hope for this way of going about the learning and synod in our church as well. So thank you so much. We're going to dive next into highlighting just a few of the tools in the resource. And I want to, before we do that, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we'll send the slides. These are just a few ideas that might make sense in your parish or ministry context, such as sharing a resource like a handout or a book with someone you'd like to learn with or introduce the concept to. Hosting a film screening can be really impactful, followed by a discussion, and there are some recommended films at the end of the guide. Inviting your pastor to give a homily around restorative justice related to liturgical days of significance or current events, or hosting a speaker to share from their experience in this work. And then finding, if you have the opportunity to step into an experience a circle process. And again, we'll keep sharing more resources and opportunities for this as well. But next we wanted to just share a few tools in the guide, and one that's already supplemental to. We've talked about how we want this to continue to live and breathe and grow. And thank you to May for helping us kind of build a roadmap that we can bring with us. So Tomei, would you introduce us to this roadmap tool?
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Dr. Desiree. Thank you for that. So I'm going to drop it in the chat. Let's see. So you can all have access to it. And it's really the idea of looking at how would you describe the phase that you're in? What objectives do you hope to accomplish? And how will you know you achieved it, right? So what's your success criteria? And what needs to happen? What tasks need to be in place? What resources? Responsibility? Who's going to be responsible for this? Will you put a team together, right? And what's the projected time frame? And be generous with that, right? Because nothing happens overnight. And also, what's the date that you hope to complete it? This is something that I use in K through 12 trainings and with teachers and administrators and superintendents. And it's really the action plan to just get them started. And also, again, I keep saying, right, have compassion and grace, because sometimes we get so excited with this work and we want to jump right into it, but we can't do everything at once. So just find places where you can begin. Right. And K through 12, they often look at a 3 to 5 year plan. So just to really look at it, and we will go through this each series session. So we'll build on it more and more at that time. I'm going to pass this back over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. What I love about that is that as you get an idea, just pop it into the roadmap and you can fill out the rest of the details and chart another time. You can come back to it. It doesn't have to be perfectly created, you know, from the first moment. And that we wish and hope and imagine for it to be something that you then bring to your community, to your team, to continue to develop it in collaboration. And so I wanted to say a few words about some tools around identifying a goal and understanding your context. And first, just say how much, when we were choosing the image for this guide, how much this one really spoke to us, particularly because of how these circles are nested within one another. And that's so true of relationships too, right? That nothing exists in isolation, but what happens to us individually is impacted by and influences our communal relationships and interpersonal ones, that are the systems that we are a part of, impacted by, participating in, and our culture broadly. So sometimes it can be overwhelming to be thinking about all of these different facets. And by kind of identifying these different levels, it might be helpful to choose one. Like when you think about the issue that concerns you, which level are you most drawn to addressing it at? And then think about the kinds of responses that make sense for that level of engagement. And so there's a worksheet in the guide that gives an example of how to do this. And we can go to the next slide. So this is working around the issue of aiming to reduce violent crime, of, you know, are we looking at the individual behavior, the responses to that behavior in the community, the systemic injustices, or the cultural perceptions, and how does that shape the way that we respond? And recognizing that all of these things are interrelated. So we don't want to, you know, focus so much on one that we discount what's happening in the other influencing levels, but that we can maybe make more progress if we kind of focus our energies in a particular way. So this is an example worksheet. There's also a blank one on page 45 if you're looking at the hard copy. And so we wanted to just kind of offer that as a teaser. And then also throughout the guide, you'll find these reflection questions that can be used in multiple ways. So maybe personally bringing it into prayer and silence. Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's reflecting on them in circle with your community or in dialogue with a thought partner. But we hope for these reflection questions to really be an integral part of your journey. So this is just an example set of reflection questions to get you thinking about what's happening in your given context or environment or setting. And so we wanted to just kind of invite reflection on that. We had, full disclosure, we had initially planned to do some time of silent reflection. And as we're learning in this space, we are learning with you. And I don't think we'll have time for that individual reflection because we want to honor your time and that you're already here with us for an hour and a half. So we are not going to give that time for individual reflection now, but we hope that you will maybe set aside a few minutes outside of this community time to, you know, just pick one of those tools or another that's speaking to you, calling to you, and just spend some time with it in prayer and reflection and see what comes up. So wonderful. So now we are going to move into a wonderful activity called, let me check in with my team. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. So I'm going to verbally check in with my team. So do we want to do the spiral journal exercise or the chatterfall? What feels right
What
team.
feels right is the chatterful, because I'm really looking forward to our closing prayer. And I want us to make room for that.
Okay, awesome. I agree. So things that you're hearing us mention, if we're not doing them today, we'll do them in future webinars. So come back and join us next week. All right, so Tomei, take us away with the chatterfall activity.
Sure. Thank you so much. All right. So this is going to be quick. So stay curious, dig deep, have fun. Don't overthink your answers. And we're going to use the chat to finish one of the open sentences with a short phrase, but don't hit enter yet. We're going to do it at one time. When I say 1, 2, 3 on 3, we'll hit enter and we'll see a cascade of responses, and then we'll read a few out. So the question is, what is one thing I wish to remember from today? What is one thing I wish to remember from today? And just begin to write it, but don't hit enter. I wish to remember from today. Write your answer and don't hit enter. We're going to give you like 10 seconds. I know I don't type as fast as I used to. I used to type 65 words a minute. Now I'm about 20 words a minute. Okay, so I am going to just guesstimate that we are about ready. And on the count of 3, we can hit enter so we can see the responses to I wish to remember from today. 1, 2, 3, enter. Woo! This is nice. Listening, relation between RJ and Catholic social teaching, relationships and circles, be patient, be restorative, circle process. Oh my goodness, meeting other people. I love it. I love it. Learning. This is amazing. All the beautiful people here. Thank you so much. That restorative justice can do more than procedural justice ever can. On that note, I am going to pass it over to you, Caitlin.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tomei. Thanks so much, everyone. I know, I hope you'll continue to read through what folks have shared as we just offer a couple of invitations. Do what speaks to you, but if you're feeling up for it, maybe try out explaining restorative justice to someone you know. I know that the more I practice this, the more comfortable it becomes. I encourage you to watch and check out, and we will send these links out to you in a follow-up email. In honor of Restorative Justice Week, we have made all of the recordings from our conference last year free. So if there were voices in that video you wanted to hear more of and more beyond that, please check out those videos. They're phenomenal. And finally, CMN has a blog where we share some stories of folks who are doing this work in ministry, in addition to those who are working to end the death penalty. And we encourage you to check out the blog and maybe read a couple of posts that speak to you or your area of practice, desired area of practice. And lastly, want to, and I'm going to drop a whole bunch of things in the chat now. So link here to the conference recordings, the blog, as well as a page on the digital guide to leave us a note. And throughout these series, we'd just like to invite you, we really hope to hear kind of how things are going for you. And so if you are open to us, reaching out, following up, maybe a couple months from now, how are things going? What more do you need? Click on that link to leave us a note and just tell us that you're okay with us reaching out. We would love to do that down the line. And next, I'm going to turn over to Tomei to tell us about USD's Center for Restorative Justice. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but so many thanks to all of our sponsors, and we will be highlighting one each week, and it's USD today.
Thank you so much. I am centered right at the Center for Restorative Justice with Dr. David Karp, and I just dropped the link in so you can go and look at the certificate. It's a professional certificate for restorative facilitation and leadership. It's 3 courses together, and you get on-hands training experience. You are assigned to either an apprenticeship during the process or a leadership project during the process. And I gotta tell you, it's amazing. I went through that process although I'm the resident practitioner, part of that process was my leadership program, which I actually now lead, the Heal Humanity Now initiative at the Center for Restorative Justice. So I encourage you, if you want to know more and connect the theory to the practice, click that link and sign up for the upcoming courses. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tomei. And we love, and this is part of how I know Desiree too, that USD also houses the Restorative Justice Network of Catholic Campuses, who we just love collaborating with as well. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Maura to lead us in our closing prayer.
Thank you, Caitlin. Recognizing that we are always in the presence of a loving God, I invite you all to pray this embodied prayer with me. As we move on from this time of learning together, we are reminded that implementing restorative justice, living restoratively, is an ongoing process. Much like a plant, this process is one that must be tended to and nourished so that it may flourish. So I invite you now to model this prayer with me. And if you have your eyes closed in a prayerful gesture, I invite you to open them so you can see the movements I make and mirror them along with me. Let us gather our seeds of prayer together, our hopes and dreams for a restorative future. Let us plant these seeds in fertile soil, the soil of faith and a loving community. And when these seeds sprout, let us lift this plant up to the sun, that God's grace will shine warmly on it. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Maura. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. What an amazing kickoff to this series. We look forward to seeing you next week. We will be in the evening next week at 7 p.m. Eastern. So, and you will receive another reminder email just ahead of that. So we look forward to you joining us. So just as a reminder, if you do not already have a copy of the Paths of Renewed Encounter Engagement Guide, you can view it digitally on our website. You can download a PDF and you can order a hard copy as well on the website. And we'll make sure that those links continue to be in the reminder emails. Also, thank you again to our co-sponsors, University of San Diego, Center for Restorative Justice, the Restorative Justice Initiative and Healing at University of St. Thomas, Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, and the Roundtable Association of Diocesan Social Action Directors. Thank you so much. I see one question. Can we get a replay of this session? Yes, it's all recorded and will be sent to you as well. So thank you all so much. Have a blessed week. Happy RJ week and have a beautiful holiday.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, Tomei. Thanks, Desiree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maura, and thanks, everyone.